it's all too easy when they get to that healthcare checkbox to think, oh, Medicare, check, because feels like checklist progress, one step closer to being able to call it a day and retire. But it can be a huge mistake to do so because depending on which study you look at, Medicare only covers about 50 to 60% of healthcare costs in retirement, leaving roughly half the burden of healthcare costs on the retirement income portfolio. Now, throughout your working careers, you've likely relied mostly on your employer for income and health insurance through your employer's healthcare plan. And in retirement, it's going to be up to you to budget for and plan for these potentially substantial out-of-pocket costs. Now, before we get started here, a couple of important points. As Judd said, we are very heavily regulated, so we always have to throw out our disclosures. And so here's mine. I'm not permitted to provide advice or discuss how some of the concepts that we're going to cover in our time here together today affect you personally. Our intentions this evening are to arm you with important information you need to help you make more and more informed decisions about your financial well-being and the importance of working alongside a trusted advisory service such as JHG Financial, who will be in a position to better understand your overall financial picture, cannot be stressed enough. So with that, let's dive in. And let's go back to 1985 for a moment, a time when only about 1% of household wealth was held in retirement accounts, such as 401ks and IRAs. It was a very different time altogether. Retirees lived 10 to 15 years in retirement on average. Many had access to employer-sponsored pension plans, and they simply backfilled their income needs with Social Security. Fast forward to today, where folks are living more than 20 and 30 years in retirement. Pension plans have hit the endangered species list, and today roughly 40% of household wealth is held in retirement accounts like 401ks and IRAs. Back in 1985, retirees relied heavily on their former employer to supplement Social Security. Today, there's a substantially greater emphasis on the need for increased personal savings and investing wisely. Today, it's up to you to generate the income you need to live the retirement you've always envisioned. Now, this brings us to a very common question for a lot of folks. Will Social Security be there for me? And there are indeed some legitimate challenges facing the program. Folks are living longer now more than ever before. Retiring baby boomers continue to strain reserves, and the ratio of workers to beneficiaries is shrinking. But the bottom line is that combined reserves are projected to pay full benefits through 2034, at which time continuing tax revenue is projected to cover 77% of the program's obligations, even if nothing has changed. And there are a lot of levers that lawmakers can pull to shore up the program. For example, they could raise FICA and SECA taxes, which are currently 12.4%. You pay half and your employer pays the other half. Now, if you're self-employed, you pay the entire 12.4%, but half of that is tax deductible. And you can argue the economic merits of doing so, but they could lift the maximum taxable wage base entirely, which is currently $160,200 in 2023. So in other words, the 12.4% is only applied to the first $160,200 in earnings. Folks who have earnings that exceed the annual Social Security taxable wage base represent an additional source of funding for the program should lawmakers decide to raise this. Now, lawmakers could also change the age at which someone reaches full retirement age, move the goalpost, so to speak. They could reduce or even eliminate cost of living adjustment increases. The challenges can indeed be solved. It's just a matter of making the adjustments that need to be made. Now, the Social Security program isn't without its detractors, but ultimately it's a pay-as-you-go system, with each older generation having a hand in the pocket of younger generations. That makes it an entitlement from a psychological perspective. So while a person may or may not agree with the general ideology of the program, just about all of us pay into it, which means when we retire, we're all going to want the same economic benefits of the program that we helped fund when we were working. Now, ultimately, I just don't believe any future Congress is going to want the program to fail on its watch, because that would be an unfavorable outcome from a political perspective. Now, first, let's talk about now eligibility and calculation of benefits. And first, you must be eligible. So to be eligible for a benefit, you need to be what the Social Security Administration calls fully insured, and it doesn't take much. So for example, for each multiple of $1,640 you earn in 2023, you earn 1 credit up to a maximum of 4 credits per year, which means most folks are fully insured in about 10 years. Now, being fully insured determines your eligibility, but not your benefit amount. Your benefit amount is based off of a formula which factors in the highest 35 years of earnings. Essentially, it's a total inflation-adjusted earnings divided by 420 months, which is called your averaged index monthly earnings, or AIM. Now, unfortunately, the formula doesn't end there, or our benefits would be much higher. So once the Social Security Administration has your AIM determined, they then factor in what are called bin points. And they're called bin points because of the way that they appear when the formula is placed on a graph. So here's how it works. The Social Security Administration will pay you by way of your full retirement age benefit up to $1,024 in 2022, or 2023. You've now reached your $1,115 in 2023. Now you've now reached your second bin point, in which case the Social Security Administration will pay you 32 cents on the dollar for every dollar that you earn between $1,116 and $6,721. Now, if your earnings history is significant enough, you'll then move to the third bin point, and Social Security will pay you 15 cents for every dollar of your AIM that exceeds $6,721 up to the maximum taxable wage base in each year. Now, since you experience vastly diminished returns on your Social Security contributions once you hit the second and third bin points, this is one of the reasons why you'll oftentimes hear the Social Security program referred to as a progressive system. In other words, folks whose earnings never eclipse the first bin point get significantly more of what they contributed back via their benefit than someone whose AIM reaches into the second and third bin points. Furthermore, if you live to your life expectancy, you'll receive more in Social Security benefits than you paid into the program. Now, finally, it's also good to know that these bin point threshold amounts increase annually with inflation, as will your AIM, since older earnings will be worth more as time goes on. And once you've surpassed a bin point, you won't lose it because your AIM will increase each year as the bin point amounts grow larger. So we've discussed how your full retirement age benefit is calculated. So you might now be interested in when your full retirement age actually is, and it's based on your year of birth. For example, for those folks born between 1943 and 1954, your full retirement age is age 66. For anyone born in 1960 and thereafter, your full retirement age, for now anyway, is age 67. Now, I say for now because I fully believe this is a moving target as lawmakers attempt to shore up the program. For everyone in between, just add 2 months for each year of birth between 1954 and 1960. Now, this brings us to collecting early, which many of you may already know that you absolutely can, but it does result in a permanent reduction. In fact, anytime you collect any Social Security benefit early, whether it's your own, a spousal, an ex-spousal, or a survivor benefit, if you collect it early, with only a couple of exceptions, it is a permanent reduction. Now, it's always nice to have these handy charts, but if you're curious about beginning your benefit mid-year, say 64 and 5 months, for example, the reduction methodology is that the benefit is reduced 0.5% for each month before normal retirement age up to 36 months. And if the number of months exceed 36, then the benefit is further reduced an additional 0.5% per month. Now, deciding when to collect is an important decision that can have a dramatic effect. And this decision can be even more impactful for women, as you ladies tend to outlive us fellows and therefore are more likely to need it longer than we will. We'll take a closer look at this as we move through the material today. Now, in addition to age, there are other factors to consider when determining when to begin Social Security. For example, collecting benefits early and working. Social Security doesn't really like it when you say, I'm retired now, and begin collecting benefits early, and then go on to earn any substantial amount. To show you just how much they dislike this, they'll penalize you for doing so by withholding your benefits. For example, they will withhold $1 of benefits for every $2 that you earn over $21,240 in 2023. Now, you'll give it changes a little bit in the year that you reach full retirement age. They will withhold $1 in benefits for every $3 that you earn above $56,520. The month that you reach full retirement age, there's no penalty whatsoever. There's no withholding. You can, once you get to full retirement age, you can now work and earn as much as you like. Now, one of the most common questions we get about the withholding is, do I get it back? And you most certainly do, but not in a nice, tidy little lump sum check like you might think, or at least you might want anyway. Instead, Social Security will simply increase your benefit slightly when you reach full retirement age to account for the previous withholding, and you slowly get it back over time. Another common question we get is, what kind of income counts? And the best way to answer that question is by asking another question. Is it income from working? If it's income from working, then it probably is. Now, it doesn't matter if it's W-2, 1099, or net income from a business. Was the income acquired due to working? If so, then it generally accounts. Now, I think a good example that helps to clarify this concept is rental income. Active rental income generally counts, and passive typically does not. So if you're just going out to the mailbox once a month and collecting the rent check, it generally does not count. But if you're actively involved in the day-to-day operations of the rental business, then it generally accounts. Now, on the other hand, distributions from retirement accounts, pensions, interest, dividends, government benefits, and so on and so forth do not count. Now, another really common question that we get about collecting early and working is, what about spousal income? And this is a perfectly logical question, as many of us married folks tend to look at ourselves as one economic unit. Many of us file joint income tax returns, for example. But spousal income does not count. Only the spouse who's collecting early's income counts. So, for example, if I collect my benefit early, only my income counts. My wife's income would not. My wife's income would only count if she too were collecting her benefits early, and then it would only apply to her benefit. What about this one? Does the earnings test apply to spousal and survivor benefits in addition to my own personal Social Security benefit? Indeed, it does. And finally, does putting money away in a 401k or an IRA reduce earnings for purposes of this test? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, it does not. Now, what if someone decides to defer their benefits beyond full retirement age? Well, for each year from full retirement age through age 69 to age 70 that you delay taking your benefits, you'll automatically receive 8% simple growth credited to your full retirement age benefit, called delayed retirement credits. Now, anyone with a full retirement age of 66 who delays taking benefits through age 69, for example, will be the benefactor of 32% cumulative growth. If your full retirement age is 67 currently, because you were born in 1960 or thereafter, you'll receive 24% cumulative growth from full retirement age through age 69. Now, an important point I'd like to make here also is that from age 62 to age 70 represents a 76% increase in the overall benefit. 76%, that's pretty substantial, and I think most folks would probably agree. This is why, for the right person, a delaying strategy could be very helpful in helping you reach your retirement goals and objectives. So when should someone start taking benefits? And that's the million-dollar question, and it's also a very subjective one as well. Essentially, there's no right or wrong way, no one-size-fits-all filing strategy for Social Security. Everyone's circumstances are, of course, personal and unique to them. Now, with this being said, some of the most important considerations a person can make as it relates to beginning his or her individual benefits are their own personal thoughts on their current health, lifestyle, longevity, their family history, and their current financial well-being. All of these factors must play a role in the decision. Generally speaking, however, those who feel they have longevity on their side and have sufficient assets to bridge the gap, to tap into to bridge the gap, they should probably consider a delaying strategy in order to maximize how much they ultimately get out of Social Security. On the other hand, those who don't believe they have longevity on their side or lack the means and financial resources to adopt a delaying strategy should probably consider beginning their benefits sooner rather than later in order to maximize how much they take from the program. So let's take a look at some break-even points to get a little more dialed in here. For example, by age 76, you're better off having begun your benefits at age 67 versus age 62. By age 78, you're better off having begun your benefits at age 70 versus 62. And by age 81, you're better off having begun your benefits at 70 versus age 67. Now, keep in mind when you're looking at these break-even points that many of you will live longer than you might think. In fact, if you Google SSA publication number 10147, I'll say that again, Social Security Administration publication 10147, the very first result is from the Social Security Administration called When to Start Receiving Retirement Benefits. On the first page, bottom right-hand corner, that publication tells us 1 in 3 who are 65 today will live to at least age 90, and 1 in 7 will live to at least age 95. And the Society of Actuaries has very similar numbers to this. And one of the things that we know about statistics is the larger the pool of data that you have to draw your assumptions from, the more accurate your predictions get. And these two institutions happen to have some of the largest pools of data on life expectancy that exists today. Now, one final point before we move on here, when you're considering longevity risk with these break-even points, it's important not to frame it as simply a matter of chance. When you think of this as mere probabilities and chance, most folks tend to, and at great risk, underappreciate the longevity factor. It becomes more of a gambling type scenario. And barring personal health factors or family history or a combination thereof, wagering against a long life, it's a bad bet. You should look at delaying your benefits to take advantage of a 76% larger benefit as a hedging strategy, insurance against living a very long life and against a decline in your desired retirement lifestyle through rising costs. If guaranteed income is important to your peace of mind, you can consider other solutions that can be used as a Social Security bridging strategy. Now let's move on to spousal and survivor benefits. Now, ultimately, you can collect a spousal benefit of up to 50% of the other spouse's full retirement age benefit if you're 62 and have been married for at least 12 months. Additionally, as per the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015, you can't collect a spousal benefit until the other spouse files for his or her own benefit. And finally, if you collect a spousal benefit early, as we mentioned earlier, it will be reduced, but there's absolutely no benefit to delaying a spousal benefit past full retirement age. Now, it should also be noted that it's possible to receive benefits even if you've never worked or didn't have enough credits to be eligible for your own benefits. In other words, if you're married, you can receive spousal benefits based on your spouse's earnings history. If you have your own benefit, for the most part, if you file for spousal benefits, you'll actually get the greater of your own benefit or the spousal benefit, whichever is higher. So that brings up the question, what about survivor benefits? You know, survivor benefits work very differently than spousal benefits. First off, surviving spouses who are married at least 9 months can collect a survivor benefit as early as age 60. So spousal benefits, you have to be married 12 months, but survivor benefits, it's 9 months. Additionally, you can take spousal benefits as early as age 60, but survivor benefits can actually be begun as early as age 60. So 62 for spousal, 60 for survivor. Again, however, it's going to be reduced if you collect it early. So, for example, if you take your survivor benefit at age 60, the reduction is 28.5%. So that brings up another question. What are surviving spouses entitled to? Well, surviving spouses are entitled to whatever the deceased spouse was collecting at the time of his or her death or was eligible to collect. And I'll repeat that. Surviving spouses are entitled to whatever the deceased spouse was collecting at the time of his or her death or was eligible to collect. This is where survivor benefits really take a turn away from how spousal benefits work in terms of the basic fundamentals. With spousal benefits, as we talked about, we know that spouse B is entitled to up to 50% of spouse A's full retirement age benefit amount, depending on the age of spouse B when they begin collecting that spousal benefit. But with survivor benefits, however, if the surviving spouse is full retirement age, they get 100% of whatever the deceased spouse was collecting when they passed away. Now think about how I said that for a moment. 100% of whatever they were collecting whenever their spouse passed away. Not only is it up to 100% and not up to 50% like spousal, but that also means that if the deceased spouse had delayed their benefits to age 70, for example, the surviving spouse would get that benefit inclusive of the accumulative growth of the 8% delayed retirement credits the deceased spouse acquired for delaying when they were alive. Conversely, that also means that if the deceased spouse had begun his or her benefits early and therefore reduced, the surviving spouse would be entitled to that reduced benefit amount, because remember, it's whatever they were collecting at the time of their death. And if the surviving spouse were also less than full retirement age when they started the survivor benefits, it would be further reduced. Now, finally, that brings me to a potential strategy for surviving spouses. If the surviving spouse had not yet begun his or her own benefit, it remains disconnected from the survivor benefit. So, in other words, here's how it would work. The surviving spouse can collect the survivor benefit, as we said, as early as age 60. Now, it's going to be reduced for collecting early, but if their own benefit will grow and eventually accrue delayed retirement credits that they can then switch to when they reach age 70. Now, again, this only works if they haven't already begun their own benefits. But if their own benefit will outgrow the survivor benefit by age 70, they absolutely should consider collecting that survivor benefit as soon as possible, even if it's reduced for collecting early, because it's essentially a free income stream that they can take while their own benefit grows untouched in the background. Now, one consideration here, of course, is if they continue to work and they're less than full retirement age, this could result in a withholding, as we discussed earlier. So the client will, you will want to weigh the benefits of the free survivor income stream against the benefits of continuing to work. Now, you may want to either reduce how much you're working or quit working altogether. Now, if on the other hand, your own benefit won't outgrow the survivor benefit, then the decision on when to begin the survivor benefit will need to be based on need, other financial resources you might have, and your thoughts on your own longevity and life expectancy. Just don't delay beyond 70, as there's no benefit whatsoever for doing so. Now, what about ex-spouses? Believe it or not, Social Security benefits don't necessarily end in divorce, but the rules are slightly different. For ex-spousal benefits, you have to have been married for at least 10 years. You can't remarry, and your ex-spouse just has to be eligible for his or her own benefits. Now, that's different than spousal benefit rules that dictate that the spouse that you're collecting off of must be collecting their own benefit. For ex-spousal, the ex-spouse you're collecting off of just needs to have 40 quarters of paying FICA or SECA taxes. That's it. No need for them to be collecting because, well, to be honest, it would be too tempting for a spiteful ex-spouse to say, you know what, they can just wait. I'm going to sit on my benefit so that my ex-spouse can't collect. And you know that some of them, if they were able to financially pull it off, that they would do that. Now, there is a tiny little wrinkle here. If that ex-spouse is not yet collecting his or her own benefits, then the ex-spouses have to wait 2 years to collect off of them. So married for 10 years, divorced for 2 years. If, however, the ex-spouse is collecting their benefits, then the 2-year rule is waived. For ex-survivor benefits, the rules are that you have to have been married again for 10 years, you're at least 60, and haven't remarried prior to age 60. Now, let's think about that last little factoid that I gave you. That means that once you hit 60, you can remarry and still collect a survivor benefit off of the deceased spouse, which will likely be larger than a spousal benefit based on the new spouse's earnings record. That's because surviving spouses are, again, entitled to up to 100% of whatever the deceased spouse was collecting at the time of their death or was eligible to collect. Now, to drive the last few points home, I'll give you a real-life example. Johnny Carson, he was married 4 times. Johnny's marriages to Jody, Joanne, Joanna, and Alexis provide some useful examples. He was married to his first wife, Jody, for 14 years, his second wife, Joanne, for 9 years, his third wife, Joanna, for more than 13 years, and his fourth wife, Alexis, for 18 years, up and until his death in 2005. while the surviving spouse, Alexis, got his benefit amount as a survivor for having been married at least 9 months. Johanna, wife 3, got survivor ex-spouse benefits because their marriage lasted longer than 10 years. But his second wife, Joanne, didn't get to claim on his record at all because they were only married 9 years. And his first wife, Jody, definitely qualified for ex-survivor benefits, having been married for 14 years. The number one most important factor to remember is that a marriage lasting at least 10 years can unlock ex-spousal benefits and potentially even ex-spousal survivor benefits. The second important factor to remember is that if you're planning to remarry and you're not yet age 60, you might want to consider waiting. All right, now let's move on to healthcare costs in retirement. And again, everyone's circumstances are personal and unique, so it can be difficult to quantify just how much you're actually going to need to save for healthcare. Healthcare costs inclusive of Medicare premiums are projected to increase by almost 6% annually over the next 2 decades, and the nickel and diming effect of a very long life can be substantial. In fact, 60% of lifetime costs occur after age 65, and a third of an 85-year-old's costs on average lie in his or her future. The challenge, of course, is to plan and budget for these potentially substantial costs in retirement with a finite amount of resources. Ultimately, for folks who have longevity on their side, based on family history, lifestyle, their current health, and so on and so forth, they should plan on retirement that could last 30 or even more years. So for the second half of our presentation today, we're going to take a look at what types of costs you'll likely face in retirement. We'll talk a little bit about what Medicare covers and what it doesn't, before wrapping up with strategies to manage and address healthcare costs in retirement. Now, out-of-pocket healthcare costs for a 65-year-old couple retiring today are projected to be about $300,000 on average, and this is exclusive of long-term care costs. Now, keep in mind that these are average costs. For example, longevity costs and acute illness add additional elements of risk that can shock and destabilize a retirement income portfolio. So it's impractical at best to apply a single average cost projection because it can result in an imprecise target. At worst, it could result in being dangerously underprepared for a retiree whose healthcare costs could be substantially higher than average based on their personal circumstances. Now, the range of future costs for most retirees today will fall somewhere between $156,200 and a little over $1 million, $1,022,000, maybe call it $23,000. Now, think about that for a second. For those of you who are on the high end of this spectrum, that's very nearly the same amount that you can expect to ultimately collect in Social Security benefits. And this wide range stresses the importance of personalized planning, which should consider longevity projections, medical conditions, family history, lifestyle, Medicare coverage choices, and where someone lives, among other things. 43% of retirees' out-of-pocket costs on average will go towards things Medicare doesn't pay for, such as deductibles for doctor's appointments and hospital stays, as well as co-payments and co-insurance. 39% will go towards out-of-pocket prescription drug costs, and 18% on average will go towards Part B and D premiums. And the long pole in the tent are long-term care costs, which are most difficult to quantify. 70% of folks who are 65 today will need some form of long-term care during their lifetimes, and the cost can be substantial for some people, with average cost per year eclipsing $100,000. Ultimately, it's suggested to prepare for at least 3 years of long-term care at a minimum, with 12 to 24 months of around-the-clock care. Medicare can be an option for certain medically necessary circumstances, but the coverage is limited. Now, when I give this presentation live, I throw out a trivia question to the audience. Does Medicare cover long-term care? And what I find is that the answers are a mixed bag. Some folks say yes, and others say no, and some say maybe. There is a lot of confusion, and the confusion is completely justified because it is confusing. As a matter of fact, Medicare.gov states verbatim, you are responsible for 100% of non-covered costs, including most long-term care. Non-covered costs, huh? Care to elaborate a little bit? I mean, it's pretty vague, but here's the reality of it. Medicare covers long-term care if you're in a hospital and your doctor transfers you to a long-term or skilled nursing care facility for medically necessary reasons. But even then, you have to meet some very strict requirements, and the coverage is limited, and there are significant copays to boot. Medicare provides absolutely zero coverage for basic custodial care, such as eating, bathing, transferring, toileting, and so on and so forth. Yet this is one of the main reasons folks need long-term care in the first place, and it's not covered. By now, you're probably thinking, all right, James, I get it already. Healthcare costs in retirement, it could be quite high potentially, but what am I actually supposed to do about it? Well, let's take a look at the different parts of Medicare for a start so that we can begin to get organized with some resources and strategies. Now, as you approach 65, you'll have a decision to make, and that's whether to go with bundled or unbundled approach to Medicare. Choice one or unbundled is really an a la carte approach. If you opt for original Medicare, you'll receive Part A, which is hospital insurance, and Part B, which covers physician services and related care directly from Medicare. Then you'll have the option of adding Part D, which is prescription drug coverage, and potentially a Medigap policy that covers things that original Medicare doesn't cover, such as deductibles, copays, and co-insurance. Now, you can also add separate insurance packages, which are not part of Medigap, to supplement your Medigap coverage that will cover dental, hearing, and vision, for example, which are not covered in Medicare. Now, option two, or bundled, is a packaged approach to Medicare where you'll purchase a single policy referred to as a Medicare Advantage Plan, aka Part C, from a private insurer. Now, Medicare Advantage plans are rather unique, and I say that because first, you'll still pay your premiums for original Medicare directly to Medicare. Now, for most everyone, they receive, I'm air quoting here, premium-free Part A because they have over 40 quarters of paid Medicare taxes. So for the most part, we're talking about Part B premiums here. Medicare then directs, and this is a bit of an oversimplification, but still a pretty good way to explain it, I think. Medicare then redirects a portion of those premiums to the private insurer, and in exchange, the private plan administers Part A and B on behalf of Medicare. Then for additional premium, in most cases, the Medicare Advantage Plan will also cover things such as prescription drugs, Medicare deductibles, copays, and co-insurance, and a few ancillary benefits such as dental, hearing, and vision. Now, as with any insurance, the more coverage you add, the more expensive the premiums can potentially become. Now, many Medicare Advantage plans have Part D prescription drugs included, but not all do, and in some instances, it may be more cost-effective to purchase a prescription drug plan separately, depending on the drugs you need or the area of the country in which you live, for example. Now let's take a look at where the rubber meets the road on Part A, and that's what you're responsible for versus what Medicare will pay. Now, first, an individual must meet the $1,600 deductible before Medicare will pay for anything at all. Now, once the deductible's been met, you pay nothing else for days 1 through 60. Now, days 61 through 90, Medicare will continue to provide coverage, but you'll be responsible for a $400 per day copayment. And days 91 and beyond, Medicare pays for absolutely nothing unless you elect to use one of your 60 lifetime reserve days. So what's a lifetime reserve day? Well, it's a bank of days that the Medicare beneficiary can use at their discretion for days 91 and beyond. Now, when you use a lifetime reserve day, it carries an $800 per day copay. Now, they truly are lifetime reserve days, which means that you can use them at your discretion anytime during life, but once they're exhausted, they cannot be replenished. So from a planning perspective, you'll want to use these days strategically. Now, we've already talked a little bit about long-term care stays and when Medicare will pay and when they will not pay. Now, to review, if you're in a hospital for 3 consecutive days and your physician transfers you to a skilled or nursing care facility for medically necessary reasons, there is some coverage. Again, there's no coverage at all for basic custodial care. Specifically, the coverage breaks down like this. Days 1 through 20 won't have a deductible, and Part A will cover all of the costs. Day 21 through 100, however, will carry a $200 per day copay requirement, and days 101 and thereafter, Medicare pays for absolutely nothing. And the real kicker is that you can't use lifetime reserve days for long-term or skilled nursing care facility stays. Now, again, the cost can really start to add up for many folks during retirement. Now, another point I'd like to make this evening is that a growing number of folks who think they've been hospitalized for purposes of getting coverage for long-term care stays are finding that they really weren't. Seniors on Medicare who did in fact spend multiple nights in the hospital are learning after the fact that they weren't formally admitted. Instead, they'd been placed in observation status by the hospital. Now, Medicare covers the first 100 days of care in skilled nursing or long-term care facilities, but only for patients who were first formally admitted to the hospital for 3 consecutive days, excluding the discharge day. And again, patients must require care for medical reasons, not just for basic custodial care. Moving on to Part B, which helps pay for preventative and medically necessary doctor services and related care, such as x-rays, MRIs, and lab tests. It also covers outpatient care and durable medical equipment. Now, after the annual deductible of $226, Part B will cover 80% of costs, and you'll pay the other 20%. Now, recognize that unlike Part A, which has benefit periods, Part B is a true calendar year deductible. And additionally, unlike Part A, where part of your FICA or SECA taxes fund your Part A hospital insurance in retirement, or said another way, you simply amortize the cost of Part A over your working career. With Part B, you pay monthly premiums that are deducted from your Social Security benefit, and the premium amounts are based on income. Now, many folks are currently paying $164.90 a month. Now, if you sign up for Medicare for the first time in 2023, however, or aren't collecting Social Security benefits, or will have income that reaches into the second IRMA threshold or higher, your Part B premiums may be more. That's because Part B coverage is means tested, and every year the premium is recalculated potentially based on modified adjusted gross income from 2 years prior. So, for example, 2023 Part B premiums are based off of Maggie from 2021, and so on and so forth. So again, anything that affects modified adjusted income can impact a person's Part B premiums 2 years down the road. IRMA, or income-related monthly adjustment amount, is also applied to Part D prescription drugs as well, as you can see in that last column. And that brings us to Part D, which helps us pay for prescription drugs in retirement, and they are purchased through private insurers. It's if you ultimately go with the unbundled strategy, meaning you go with original Medicare in lieu of a bundled Medicare Advantage plan, or you decide to go with the Medicare Advantage plan without prescription drugs, and you want prescription drug coverage, it's extremely important that you carefully consider the various Part D plans based on the drugs that you require and the plan's pricing accordingly. Essentially, what your premiums will be, the copayment requirements, and if the plan even covers the drugs that you need. If the plan doesn't cover a certain drug, the beneficiary has to pay the full cost, and that cost doesn't apply to the deductible. So it's a double assault on the budget. While Medicare sets the annual deductible amounts each year, the plan itself determines which drugs are subject to the deductible. And one plan may pay the full cost of the drug up front, and another might apply the deductible requirement to the same drug. And the deductible applies to Part D the same way, whether you purchase a standalone plan or get drug coverage through a bundled Medicare Advantage plan. Now, again, just like any insurance, coverage will be different from plan to plan, so it's vitally important to consider personal health needs and circumstances when you're choosing a plan. Also, be sure to confirm that the nearest or preferred pharmacy is in-network. You don't want to choose a plan based on perceived cost, only to find out that the pharmacy of choice is out of network, potentially offsetting the premium savings that led to the choice of the plan in the first place. But how does Part D actually work? So let's break it down. To start, you'll pay the first $505 as a maximum deductible in 2023 before the plan will pay for anything at all. Once the deductible has been met, the plan will then pay 75%, and you'll pay the remaining 25% of drug costs up to $4,660 of total drug costs. Now, a couple of key points here. First, the total cost is inclusive of the $505 deductible. And second, the total costs include both the plan's costs and your costs as well. Now, once the costs reach $660, is at this point that you enter the donut hole. Except I don't like calling it the donut hole anymore because it doesn't really exist anymore, at least not in the true sense or original meaning. And here's why. Before the hole was essentially closed when total costs reached what was called the coverage gap phase, aka the donut hole. The beneficiary was responsible for all costs while in the donut hole until the maximum out-of-pocket costs reached the final phase total, or what's referred to as catastrophic coverage phase. So what changed? What closed down this donut hole. Well, Congress imposed new rules that mandated Part D carriers and drug manufacturers co-opt together a series of collective and incremental discounts on both the plan premiums and the drug costs in aggregate, so that by 2021, the beneficiary's share of the cost up to the final phase total out-of-pocket cost threshold was 25%, the exact same share of drug costs that the beneficiary was responsible for in the initial coverage phase. So how can this still be called the donut hole when there's no longer a hole where the beneficiary is responsible for all costs? Now, another important point I'd like to make about the second coverage phase is, or donut hole, if you want to call it that, is what's included to help you reach the final catastrophic phase. Whereas the initial coverage phase with the threshold of $4,660 is inclusive of the beneficiary's total out-of-pocket cost plus what the plan paid, the second phase is exclusive of what the plan paid via the discounts that it provided to get the beneficiary's cost down to 25% of drug costs. And finally, we'll move on to the final catastrophic phase, which is reached when total out-of-pocket costs reach $7,400. If and when you do reach the catastrophic coverage phase, you'll pay substantially lower copays and coinsurance for the drugs covered in the plan, specifically the greater of 5% of the cost for each of your drugs, or $4.15 for generic and $10.35 for brand name drugs. Now let's talk a little bit about Medicare Supplement, or Medigap, which does exactly as it says. It fills in many of the gaps in coverage of Parts A and B. Now, Medigap policies are sold by private insurance companies and can help pay for things such as Medicare deductibles, co-insurance, and some extra benefits such as care when you travel outside the U.S. If you have original Medicare and you buy a Medigap policy, Medicare will pay its share of Medicare-approved amounts for covered healthcare costs first, then your Medigap policy pays its share of covered benefits. While it's true Medigap policies are indeed offered through various private insurers and identified in most states by specified letters, they are standardized plans because the law mandates what features the respective plans must offer. Because they're standardized, once you settle on a plan letter with coverage within your budget, you could then shop on price alone, which surprisingly can vary substantially from insurer to insurer. A few other points of consideration here is, first, as bullet 3 of the slide indicates, Medigap plans will only provide the same benefits that original Medicare provides. And since original Medicare does not cover dental, vision, or hearing, therefore neither do Medigap plans. Now, with that being said, many insurers, including those that offer Medigap plans, also offer packages for dental, hearing, and vision separately as well. Second, Medigap policies must cover the insured wherever they seek health care in the U.S., and this can be very beneficial to snowbirds. So if you have a winter and a summer home, for instance, it might be cheaper to establish coverage based on one location over the other. For example, you might be cheaper to purchase Medigap in Michigan than it is to buy in Florida, or so on and so forth. So now the insurer has the right to adjust your rate if you move to one location full time over the other, but they don't always do that. And it also is going to be circumstantial on how much time you spend in both places. And many folks go back and forth anyway. So it's important to compare the cost of both locations. Finally, Medigap policies, you have to have both Part A and B of original Medicare in order to enroll. You're going to pay a monthly premium for your Medigap policy in addition to your Medicare premiums, and a Medigap policy covers one person. So spouses who are enrolled in original Medicare have to buy a separate Medigap policy. And finally, while the Medicare plans may be standardized, they are most decidedly not one-size-fits-all plans. So you have to evaluate each plan to find the one that aligns most closely with your personal needs and circumstances. Now, as we've already mentioned several times throughout today's conversation, out-of-pocket costs in retirement can be substantial. And this graphic just breaks down some of the annual Medicare costs in $2023 for a married couple filing jointly, with modified adjusted income from 2021 of less than $194,000, just for some added perspective. Now, due to the IRMA penalties we talked about earlier for Part B and D premiums, your annual average out-of-pocket cost per person could be substantially more. And again, the individual parts of Medicare are single coverage, so you need to double these numbers for spouses who are both enrolled in Medicare. Moving on to Part C, or Medicare Advantage plans. Bundled standalone Medicare Advantage plan policies are all in one plan sold by private insurers that serve the individual in a similar manner to utilizing original Medicare and purchasing Part D prescription drug and Medigap coverage separately. Both Medigap and Medicare Advantage plans will cover things that original Medicare won't, such as deductibles, coinsurance, and some extra benefits such as care, again, when you travel outside the U.S., but there are some notable differences that should be considered. The two most significant differences are that first, unlike Medigap plans, prescription drug coverage is included in many Medicare Advantage plans, and secondly, most Medicare Advantage plans have networks. All of the same evaluations and considerations that we talked about should be given to Medigap, and Part D prescription drug plans will also be necessary for choosing the right Medicare Advantage plan, but you'll also need to choose between a plan where the doctor, pharmacy, and other preferred facilities are in network. It doesn't do you any good if you merely shop on price alone, only to find out after the fact that the preferred doctor or pharmacy or other facilities aren't in network, unnecessarily driving up out-of-pocket costs. Additionally, as with prescription drug plans, make sure the Medicare Advantage plan covers the drugs that you need, and be sure to compare and contrast the cost for the drugs that you need as well, because as with any insurance, one insurer may have lower out-of-pocket costs for the other for the exact same drugs. It can also make sense to explore Medicare Advantage plans that don't provide prescription drug coverage and potentially purchase a Part D plan separately. In some instances, this can be more cost-effective. Now we'll take a few minutes to go over some critical points about enrollment. Now, first, if you're already getting benefits from Social Security, you'll automatically be enrolled in Parts A and B starting the first day of the month that you turn 65, and you'll get your Medicare card in the mail 3 months before your 65th birthday. It's important to keep in mind, too, that if you opt to delay your benefits past 65, it's your responsibility to contact Medicare and get signed up. Otherwise, you'll face permanent penalties. In order to avoid these penalties, you need to know that the initial enrollment period is the 7-month period beginning 3 months before the month in which you turn 65 and extends 3 months beyond the month in which you turn 65. And just in case you're interested in what these penalties are, if you missed this window, the penalty for Part B is 10% times the number of years you should have enrolled but did not, and it is permanent. Now, these penalties can also apply to Part D. Now, some of you may want to keep working past age 65, and many folks enroll in Medicare Part A at 65, even though they have employer coverage, because it's free unless they or their spouse have paid fewer than 40 quarters of Medicare taxes. Doing so means that Part A can supplement the hospital coverage through the employer plan, and it won't cost you a thing. However, you may decide to wait, or may want, if you want to continue contributing pre-tax dollars to an HSA. Also, it might be wise to delay signing up for Part B while still working, though. That way, you don't have to pay premiums for both Part B and the employer coverage. On top of that, if you do enroll in Part B along with your employer plan, the employer plan is always primary when a large company provides it. That means the employer plan pays your medical bills first, then Part B kicks in. Part B will only pay for services it covers that the company does not. So unless the employer plan doesn't cover much, you could be paying monthly Part B premiums with little or no added benefit. Now, another key point here, having health insurance through an employer that's considered group coverage and there are more than 20 employees is considered by Medicare as a large group plan, and therefore the participant has what's called creditable coverage. So if you had creditable coverage through an employer which has ended, there's a special enrollment period where you can roll late without incurring penalties, and it starts during the 8th month period that begins the month after employment or coverage ends, whichever happens first. Other life events that allow you to enroll late without penalties include moving, getting married, adopting, having a baby, or a death in the family. Now, if you're still working at 65, it's imperative that you consult with your benefits administrator to see how the plan coordinates with Medicare. Specifically, the laws that prohibit large companies, and again, those are companies with group coverage and more than 20 employees, from requiring Medicare-eligible employees to drop the employer plan and sign up for Medicare, do not apply to companies with fewer than 20 people. In this situation, the employer decides. And if the employer does require you to enroll in Medicare, which is the most common, by the way, Medicare automatically becomes your primary coverage at 65, and the employer plan provides secondary coverage. In other words, Medicare settles your medical bills first, and the group plan pays only for services it would cover but Medicare doesn't. So if you fail to sign up for Medicare when required, you could essentially be left with no coverage. And I'll wind down with a quick story here. A few years ago, my wife when I were out walking the dog, and she says, my coworker Mike had a heart attack. And he's okay, but he racked up nearly $100,000 in medical bills, and our plan at work is saying it's not going to pay for any of it. How can they do that? I'm so glad we have insurance through your work. See, to her, this just sounded kind of criminal. But on a hunch, I asked her how old Mike was, and she said, well, I think he's like 65 or 66. Why? Well, I went on to explain, how the plan becomes subordinate to Medicare, but only pays for qualified medical services that Medicare doesn't pay. And it sounds like Mike didn't sign up for Medicare, so the plan has no obligation to pay. Now, $100,000 is not insignificant, and as you can imagine, this was a huge and unplanned hit to his finances. So for time's sake, I'm going to just kind of skip past a couple of these. I apologize for that. But, in closing, as we've talked about, we've covered a lot, enough to make you dizzy. And it's important to make the right decision about when to collect Social Security based on your personal circumstances, whether that's collecting early at a reduced amount or, leveraging a bridging strategy with a guaranteed income solution that you can maximize how much you ultimately get from the program. But it's also important to understand that Social Security won't be enough to cover your out-of-pocket costs in retirement. So be sure not to overlook the impact that longevity and the substantial cost of healthcare and retirement can have on your finances in retirement, and plan accordingly. The good news is that you're not alone. JHG Financial is here to help you sort through all the intricate rules of Social Security and Medicare, as well as all the potential resources you have access to, and to help you better understand how they apply to you so that you can make optimal decisions that will help you achieve the lifestyle that you envision in retirement. With that, I'll say thank you very much, and we'll turn it back over to Judd to close it out.
Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate your time today. I didn't talk a lot about your credentials, your bio, but obviously we can tell you've got over 2 decades of experience in this area. Obviously, you hold many more letters than I do behind my name, being a CFP like Al, a CHFC, a CLU, and so just so much information that we've given our clients today, and I think it's a huge value add. So if anyone has questions about this, certainly come to myself or Craig or your tax preparer. We can put you in touch with someone that, even though I am licensed in long-term care, Medicare, etc., Al, certainly his experience outweighs me by maybe a couple of years. But anyway, nevertheless, James, we really appreciate you being here, and we thank everyone being respectful of your time. We thank you for your business, but above all, we really appreciate the trust that you put into our hands. A big round of applause for Craig for getting this kind of teed up for us and doing that. Craig, do you have any comments that you'd like to make as we close it out?
First, I do want to thank James. Phenomenal job, James. I think it was very informative. I know my clients appreciate it. And other than that, Judd, I just do want to remind everyone our next webinar is September 26th. This one here is recorded, will be up on my website within a week. So, but September 26th at 6:30, we will have an IRS employee speaking about the 87,000 people coming after you.
Well, I bet they won't be as informative as James, but nevertheless, again, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. We look forward to seeing you on the next one, and please give us a call, shoot us an email with any questions you might have on the topics we have talked about tonight. Have a fantastic evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.